like my man? He turn you on?
Thanks, baby.
You are valuable. You're important. And you have to take care of yourself.
On December 27th, 2024, in the quiet town of Springfield, Kentucky, a tragic event unfolded that would forever alter the lives of many. Kadesha Burch, a 31-year-old mother of two, was found dead in her home, a victim of a senseless act of violence. The assailant, Roosevelt Davis, the father of her children, who had traveled from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, with a chilling intent. But what led this former high school athlete down such a dark path? And how did a relationship filled with promise devolve into a deadly confrontation? Stay with us as we unravel the events leading up to that fateful night. Before we continue, please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated. Your support means the world to us, and we truly appreciate it. Thank you. Kadesha Burch, known to friends and family as Day Day, was a warm and radiant woman who brought joy to everyone around her. As a mother of two young boys, her children were always her top priority. She was the kind of person who made people feel special just by being in the room, with an infectious smile and a heart full of love. Her family and the Springfield community knew her as a dedicated, hardworking mom who did everything in her power to provide for her boys and give them a better life. Even in the toughest of times, she managed to keep her spirits high, always pushing through the challenges life threw her way. However, beneath that bright exterior, Kadesha had been struggling with her own private battles, particularly in her turbulent relationship with Roosevelt. Roosevelt Davis was once a promising high school athlete with a bright future ahead of him. Growing up in Milwaukee, he was admired by his peers for his athletic abilities and the potential he showed. But as time went on, things began to take a darker turn. His life, once on track, began to spiral after a series of personal challenges. Legal troubles, including run-ins with the law, added to his growing list of problems. His mental health, which had once been stable, started to deteriorate, leading him to make choices that would further derail his future. In the midst of this chaos, Roosevelt found himself in a complex and ultimately destructive relationship with Kadesha. What started as a relationship full of promise soon became one filled with tension, emotional turmoil, and violence. The combination of his declining mental state and their increasingly volatile relationship set the stage for the tragedy that would follow. In October 2024, Kadesha and Roosevelt's already troubled relationship reached a breaking point. An argument escalated into a violent confrontation, with Roosevelt becoming physically aggressive. Fearing for her life, Kadesha acted in self-defense, grabbing a gun and shooting Roosevelt. The incident left him with injuries, but it wasn't a premeditated attack. Kadesha was simply trying to protect herself from a man who had become increasingly volatile. However, despite the circumstances, the legal system charged Kadesha with attempted murder. Her supporters argued that she was defending herself after enduring months of physical and emotional abuse, but the case was complicated by the fact that Roosevelt was the father of her children, and the situation was portrayed in a way that blurred the lines of self-defense. This led to months of legal battles, with Kadesha behind bars, unable to be with her children during this traumatic time. Following the shooting, Roosevelt's mental state continued to deteriorate. Family and friends noticed his increasing anger and erratic behavior. His mood swings became more intense, and he seemed consumed by rage, unable to process the events of October. While he had once been a promising young man, his struggles with mental health, combined with his inability to accept the reality of what had happened, fueled a growing resentment. It was as though he was unraveling, and the man he had once been was slipping further away with each passing day. The anger he harbored toward Kadesha only grew, especially as he became more desperate to regain control over his life. As his emotions spiraled, he seemed to believe that revenge would somehow restore the sense of power and control he had lost. After spending several months in jail, Kadesha was granted bond just before Christmas 2024. It was a small victory in a long, difficult battle, and her family and friends rallied around her, eager to see her reunited with her children. Kadesha was understandably relieved, filled with hope for a fresh start. She expressed her gratitude on social media, thankful for the support she'd received during her time behind bars and excited at the prospect of a peaceful holiday with her sons. The future seemed uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, there was hope on the horizon. Little did she know, the peace she longed for would soon be shattered. While Kadesha was celebrating her release and planning to rebuild her life, Roosevelt was plotting a tragic course. Reports would later reveal that, driven by anger and a thirst for revenge, Roosevelt had resorted to desperate measures. He robbed a bank in Milwaukee, using the stolen money to purchase firearms and camouflage gear. It was clear that he had a singular goal in mind: to kill Kadesha. Armed and filled with rage, Roosevelt set his sights on Kentucky, where he believed he could end things once and for all. Unbeknownst to Kadesha, the man who had once promised to protect her was now preparing for the final, deadly confrontation. The stage was set, and his intentions were clear: this would not end well. In the early hours of December 27, 2024, Roosevelt Davis arrived at Kadesha's residence on Claybrook Avenue in Springfield, Kentucky. Determined to carry out his deadly plan, he approached the house with chilling intent. Without any warning, he violently forced his way through the front door, entering the home where Kadesha and her mother, Frances Campbell, were staying. Once inside, Roosevelt opened fire, shooting Kadesha multiple times. Each shot was deliberate, each one ending the life of the woman who had once been his partner and the mother of his children. The chaos and violence that filled the house were overwhelming, leaving little time for either woman to react or escape. Frances, who was in the room with Kadesha, was also caught in the crossfire. She was shot but miraculously survived, despite suffering serious injuries. The night that had started like any other would become one of horror and loss, as the life of Kadesha was violently taken, and Frances was left fighting for her own life. Emergency responders were called to the scene shortly after the shots rang out. Upon arrival, they found Kadesha lying lifeless, her body a tragic testament to the brutality that had unfolded. Frances was found critically wounded, but somehow, she managed to remain conscious long enough to call for help. Her testimony would later provide critical insights into the events of that night, shedding light on the horrific actions of Roosevelt. As she was rushed to the hospital, the full scope of the tragedy began to sink in. The community, already shaken by the earlier violence in the relationship, was now left reeling from the brutal loss of one of their own. The investigation into what had transpired that night was just beginning, but it was already clear that the consequences of Roosevelt's actions would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. As the small town of Springfield, Kentucky, began to process the horror of what had just unfolded, Kentucky State Police launched an immediate investigation into Kadesha's murder. The pieces of the puzzle quickly began to fall into place, and it didn't take long for authorities to identify Roosevelt Davis as the primary suspect. They were no strangers to his volatile history, and the shocking nature of the crime only confirmed the fears that had been lurking in the background. The investigation revealed more than just a tragic killing. It uncovered the full extent of Roosevelt's desperate actions. A statewide alert was issued, warning police departments across the region to be on the lookout for Roosevelt Davis. The details were chilling. A man armed with guns, driven by anger, and likely armed with a deadly resolve. Roosevelt had not only been involved in the shooting but had also been responsible for a recent robbery of a bank in Wisconsin. It became clear that he was a man who had nothing left to lose. His actions, motivated by rage and an overwhelming sense of loss, seemed to have pushed him over the edge. As the manhunt began, it wasn't just about capturing a criminal. It was about understanding the mind of someone who had gone to such extreme lengths to lash out against a woman who had once been part of his life. With each passing hour, the authorities grew more determined. They knew that Roosevelt's next steps could lead to further violence, and the sense of urgency was palpable. As the search intensified, it became clear that Roosevelt was on the move, and the clock was ticking. His fate was sealed, but where would it all end? On the morning of December 27th, just hours after the murder, Roosevelt's run of violence came to a sudden halt. A Shelbyville police officer, aware of the statewide alert, spotted a vehicle speeding down Interstate 64. The officer's training kicked in, and he immediately ran the vehicle's plates. To his shock, the car was connected to a recent bank robbery in Wisconsin. But that wasn't all. The vehicle matched the description of the one linked to the murder of Kadesha Burch. In an instant, everything fell into place. Roosevelt Davis, the man who had just killed Kadesha, was sitting in that car. With no time to lose, backup was called, and the officer cautiously approached the vehicle. The scene was tense, as the officer knew that Roosevelt, desperate and potentially dangerous, was capable of anything. Yet, against all expectations, Roosevelt complied with the officer's commands. He was arrested without incident, although it was clear that his days of running were finally over. As Roosevelt was taken into custody, the weight of his actions began to sink in. He was charged with murder, attempted murder, and burglary. But the charges were only the beginning of the story. What drove this once promising young man to commit such a brutal and senseless act? Was it a momentary lapse in judgment, or had his actions been building for years, fueled by the anger and resentment that had taken root within him? As Roosevelt sat in the back of the police cruiser, likely contemplating his fate, his past began to catch up with him. His descent into violence was not a random act. It was the culmination of a broken man trying to reclaim control over a life that had spiraled out of his grasp. Yet, there was no redemption in his actions, only destruction. The investigation into his past would soon reveal just how deeply the scars of his mental health struggles and unresolved trauma had shaped his path. The small town of Springfield, Kentucky, had always been known for its close-knit community. In this tight town where everyone knew each other, the news of Kadesha Burch's brutal murder sent shockwaves through the residents. Kadesha was a woman many considered a friend, a neighbor, a light in the town. She had always gone out of her way to help those around her, her warmth and kindness leaving an indelible mark on everyone she met. When her life was violently taken, it felt like the very heartbeat of the town had been ripped away. In the days following her death, a sense of disbelief hung over Springfield. For a community that prided itself on its connections and support systems, this tragedy left them feeling vulnerable and uncertain. How could such violence happen here? How could it happen to someone like Kadesha, someone who was so deeply loved by her family, her friends, and her community? A vigil was held in Kadesha's honor, bringing together over 100 people from all walks of life to remember the woman they had lost. It was a somber evening, filled with quiet reflection and emotional tributes. People shared stories of how Kadesha had touched their lives, how she had always been there with a smile, how her laughter had brightened even the darkest of days. Friends spoke of her dedication to her children, the way she worked tirelessly to ensure they had the best life possible. Her warmth had created a ripple effect in the town, with many acknowledging that they had been better for knowing her. As candles flickered in the cold December air, the attendees mourned not just the loss of a mother and friend, but the loss of a spirit that had made Springfield feel like home. The absence of Kadesha in their lives was a void that no amount of words or prayers could fill. And yet, in the face of this pain, the town rallied around each other, determined to honor her legacy by holding on to the love and kindness she had shown them. While the town mourned, Kadesha's family was left to cope with an unimaginable loss. Her children, especially her young son, were the ones who suffered the most. After months of separation due to Kadesha's incarceration, they had finally been reunited with their mother, only for their time together to be tragically cut short. The pain of losing her was compounded by the trauma of the violence they had witnessed. Her family was left to pick up the pieces, forced to face a future without the woman who had been their pillar of strength. Kadesha's sister, in particular, became the voice of the family's grief. She shared heart-wrenching tributes on social media, expressing the deep pain of losing a sister who had been so much more than just family. Kadesha had been her confidant, her support system, her friend. The world now seemed a little darker, a little emptier without her. Kadesha's children, though young, were left with a gap in their lives that no one could fill. How would they move forward without their mother? In the face of this tragedy, the community came together to offer as much support as possible. Neighbors provided meals, friends offered their shoulders to lean on, and local organizations stepped in to assist with funeral expenses and emotional support for the family. It was a testament to how deeply Kadesha had been loved in Springfield that so many people rallied to support her family in their time of need. The town might have been left reeling from the violence, but in this moment of grief, it was clear that they were also a community bound together by the love they had for Kadesha. Yet, as the days wore on, the grief was only part of the story. There was anger, too. Anger that a woman who had fought so hard for a chance to be with her children was taken from them so violently, so senselessly. Anger that a man who had once been part of the very community that Kadesha had loved had been the one to rob her of her life. For many, this tragedy was a stark reminder of the toll domestic violence takes. Not just on the victim, but on everyone who loves them. Kadesha's family, like many others, was left to process the deep, long-lasting impact of a relationship that turned fatal. Kadesha's story became more than just the tale of a life lost. It became a symbol of the countless women trapped in abusive relationships, fighting to escape not just the physical danger but the emotional and psychological trauma as well. And as her family grieved, they vowed to ensure that her legacy would live on, not just in their hearts, but in the continued fight to end domestic violence. They would not let her death be in vain. After Roosevelt Davis's arrest, the gravity of his actions quickly became apparent. He was formally charged with the murder of Kadesha Burch, the attempted murder of her mother, Frances Campbell, and burglary following the bank robbery in Wisconsin that had funded his deadly plan. These charges were a direct reflection of the calculated nature of his crime, no longer just a desperate man lashing out in a moment of anger, but one who had carefully planned and executed his violent act. The details that emerged painted a picture of a man consumed by his rage and unable to cope with the consequences of his deteriorating mental state. His bond was set at an eye-watering $2 million, a sum that reflected the severe nature of his actions and the community's demand for justice. As the legal proceedings unfolded, it became clear that Roosevelt's past, filled with emotional instability, mental health struggles, and violent tendencies, had played a significant role in leading to this tragedy. His defense team argued that his actions were the result of these personal issues, but for many, this was a stark reminder of how untreated mental health problems can contribute to dangerous and destructive behavior. In the months that followed, the trial became a focal point for the community, with residents following the proceedings closely, hoping for a resolution that would offer some sense of justice for Kadesha and her family. As Roosevelt sat in court, facing the charges against him, there was a palpable sense of frustration and anger. Many felt that no sentence, no amount of legal retribution, could bring back the life that had been stolen. The emotional toll of Kadesha's death on her family and the community was immeasurable, and yet, the legal process continued, inching toward a conclusion that would determine Roosevelt's fate. The legal system, though necessary, seemed inadequate in the face of such a senseless loss. The families and friends left behind had to live with the scars of Roosevelt's violence, and the community could not simply move on. For many, the trial was less about seeking vengeance and more about grappling with the question of how someone who had once been a promising young man could have descended into such brutality. Could anything have been done to prevent this? What could society have done to intervene before it was too late? While the legal process moved forward, the emotional and psychological healing for Kadesha's family and the town of Springfield was just beginning. The community, shaken by the violence that had struck so close to home, came together in ways that were both heartbreaking and inspiring. The loss of Kadesha was felt deeply by all who knew her, but her death also ignited a renewed commitment to fighting for those trapped in abusive relationships. Local organizations and advocates for domestic violence survivors were quick to rally in support of Kadesha's memory. Their voices grew louder, emphasizing the need for more robust systems of support for victims of domestic violence and more awareness about the signs of abuse. Kadesha's story, though tragic, became a call to action for those who had the power to make a difference. Her death sparked conversations about mental health, about the broken systems that often fail to protect women, and about how society could better prevent future tragedies like hers. In Springfield, residents didn't just mourn the loss of one of their own. They rallied around the cause of preventing domestic violence. The community's response was not just about grief, but about a collective desire to ensure that something like this would never happen again. Memorials, educational programs, and support groups began to form, with the aim of both honoring Kadesha's life and creating a safer, more supportive environment for those at risk. Kadesha's family, despite their immense grief, also became part of this effort, speaking out about their experiences and encouraging others to seek help if they were in abusive relationships. While the legal proceedings continued, their focus shifted toward preserving Kadesha's legacy, not as a victim, but as a mother, a friend, and a woman who deserved a better life than the one she was ultimately denied. The ongoing impact of Kadesha's death was felt far beyond Springfield, sparking wider discussions about the complexities of domestic violence, the struggles of those living in abusive relationships, and the urgent need for better intervention and support systems. Kadesha's death, though devastating, became a symbol of the need for change, a reminder of the importance of listening to the signs, intervening before it's too late, and ensuring that no one has to face violence in silence. In the wake of such a loss, the town of Springfield stood united, its residents more determined than ever to make sure that Kadesha's story was one of lasting change, not just sorrow. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, it's crucial to seek help. Resources are available, including hotlines, shelters, and counseling services. Remember, you are not alone, and support is available. In our next episode, we'll delve into another gripping true crime story that will leave you questioning the lengths people will go for love and revenge. Stay tuned. If you found this story insightful, please like, subscribe, and share. Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments below. We value your engagement. Together, let's continue to shed light on these important stories.